Urgent! Putin is launching a new special military operation and Belarus is preparing to fire a nuclear missile. Something terrifying is coming. It's carnage on the Ukrainian front line, a battle for every meter. The epicenter of the fighting has shifted. Putin is furious. The shocking truth about the Shahed drone's contents. Whose trace was found in the deaths of Ukrainians? All this in our episode Hell Point. Putin is dragging his special operation into Azerbaijan as well. The first steps have been taken. Shock! The Kremlin is openly playing with fire. Aliyev responded instantly. Baku decided to act preemptively and struck its own blow against Moscow's plans. A surprise no one expected. Azerbaijan is supplying weapons to Ukraine, and serious ones at that. Sensational details about this coming up in just a moment.
The special military operation knows no borders and can take place anywhere, even on the Caspian Sea. Kremlin propagandists have started warning Azerbaijan. Solovyov, Gurulyov, and others are threatening to harass Azerbaijani entrepreneurs in Russia and possibly even carry out a so-called special military operation like in Ukraine.
And soon the Caspian may find itself in a situation where even NATO bases could appear there. And this is so dangerous that, from a geopolitical standpoint, it could lead to consequences where this might not be the last special military operation of our generation.
If they also start harassing the local guys, whose business activities are quite clear, then things will change dramatically. How much things will change, I don't know, but there is another way. The term special military operation is quite flexible. A flexible operation that can stretch along the entire border, flexible indeed.
The reason for such hysteria is the agreements reached between Ilham Aliyev and Nikol Pashinyan. Azerbaijan and Armenia have renounced territorial claims against each other and signed a peace agreement in Washington. The parties, in their relations, refrain from the use of force or the threat of its use against territorial integrity or political independence or in any other way.
Undoubtedly, this already marks a break in relations with the Kremlin, and the aforementioned trilateral document from November 9, 2020, where Putin acted as a mediator, is now essentially history. At least that's how it is perceived in the South Caucasus, in Azerbaijan and Armenia. That's unequivocal. 5 years later, today, the geopolitical situation has changed. Today, the United States is acting as the mediator, and the entire configuration, the geopolitical configuration in the South Caucasus is changing.
Russia does not agree with this turn of events, and a new escalation with the Russian Federation is expected in the South Caucasus. On the night of August 6th, Russian drones attacked the Orlivka gas complex station in the Odessa region, through which Azerbaijani gas enters Ukraine. 2 days later, on August 8th, Russian drones attacked the Sokar oil depot in the Odessa region, injuring 4 company employees. The next day, Ilham Aliyev spoke with Volodymyr Zelensky and accused Russia of Putin's strikes on Azerbaijani facilities in Ukraine. During the phone conversation, both sides condemned Russia's deliberate airstrikes on the oil depot owned by the Azerbaijani company Sokar and other facilities of our country on Ukrainian territory, as well as on the gas compressor station that transports Azerbaijani gas to Ukraine. They also emphasized their confidence that this would in no way lead to a suspension of energy cooperation between Azerbaijan and Ukraine. Aliyev also ordered $2 million to be allocated for humanitarian aid to Ukraine.
All of this is part of the ongoing confrontation between Russia and Azerbaijan, which began with that very air disaster and continues to this day. And then there was the most recent summit in Washington. In other words, there is a geopolitical confrontation underway. Tensions have arisen, relations have become strained, and at this point, it doesn't really matter why or how it started. Now, there are even strikes on the airbase. Sorry, I mean the oil depot. It's just part of it.
Azerbaijani media, citing government sources, report that if Russia continues its aggressive policy toward Azerbaijan's interests, then official Baku will begin to consider lifting the embargo on supplying weapons to Ukraine that are currently in its arsenal. Although Russian war correspondents claim that Azerbaijan has long since made the decision in favor of supplying weapons to Ukraine,
considering that, according to a number of sources, Baku is already launching the production of 120 mm and 155 mm artillery shells for their subsequent shipment to Ukraine, the decision has been made in any case. The only question is how this will be carried out, openly and directly or through a chain of intermediaries and front companies.
There have already been several problems in interstate relations between Russia and Azerbaijan. For example, in July of 2022, information emerged that Azerbaijan was supplying guided aerial bombs, as well as, in part, 82mm mortars or, well, other artillery shells. At that time, Azerbaijan claimed that it wasn't the Ministry of Defense doing this, but rather private companies, as if Azerbaijan were some kind of Germany. Here, private military companies can engage in arms supplies.
Azerbaijan has openly chosen a new ally. That ally is the United States, and Ilham Aliyev is no longer afraid of Kremlin threats and is ready for open confrontation. Whereas previously arms supplies to Ukraine were kept secret, now Azerbaijan plans to openly provide weapons to Ukraine to fight against the Kremlin. And Putin has in fact finally lost his influence in this region.
A new threat from Belarus now means they could not only enter the territory of Ukraine or NATO, but also start a nuclear war. The famous Oreshnik continues to trouble Putin. Lukashenko has gone through with it. This new saber rattling seems to be getting out of control. Could the joint exercises between the Kremlin and Minsk literally blow up the world? All the details are coming up in just a moment.
Russia and Belarus, during their joint Zapad 2025 exercises, plan to practice the use of nuclear weapons and the Oreshnik.
Of course, we plan to work on the issues of planning the use of nuclear weapons. This is, above all, an important element of our strategic deterrence. As for Oreshnik, the head of state has spoken about it more than once. All decisions have been made, the location has been determined, and work is underway. Well, of course, as part of our Zapad exercises, together with our Russian colleagues, we will also work on the planning of the use of this type of weapon.
This is an interesting statement, considering that just a month ago, both Putin and Lukashenko were saying that the first Oreshnik installation might only appear in Belarus at the end of the year.
The first thing I want to say in this regard, we have produced the first serial Oreshnik complex, the first serial missile, and it has been delivered to the troops. Now the production line is up and running. First and second, our specialists, as well as Belarusian military specialists and Russian ones, have chosen a site for the future positions. Work is currently underway to prepare these positions, so most likely we will resolve this issue by the end of the year.
Well, we're not jumping ahead. We're proceeding calmly. There's no need to rush to get ahead.
We understand perfectly well ourselves that if they have gone into mass production, as Putin said at that meeting on the bench, well, it has only just happened, literally just now. So there aren't and won't be any large quantities of this Oreshnik. Because again, our intelligence and our military experts say that it's more of a handcrafted product.
There are actually a lot of true stories connected to Oreshnik and Belarus straight from Lukashenko himself. At one point, he didn't know that the components were being manufactured in Belarus.
Recently, Vladimir Vladimirovich called me and said, listen, about this Oreshnik. I said, well, did you promise me or not? No. He says, that's not what I mean. Do you know I'm telling you that the majority of Oreshnik is actually made in Belarus? I said, that's the first I've heard of it. He said, well, look into it. I started looking into it, and it turns out we've been manufacturing these Russian missile launchers for a long time. I said, well, that's just great. A few missiles, but we'll make the launches ourselves. By the end of the year, I won't say how many, but we've already created these launches.
So Lukashenko was boasting that he would decide himself when to press the button.
You probably noticed that I had only one condition for Putin. We in Belarus will determine the targets, not the Russians, but you'll help us operate them since we don't know how yet. So we'll be pressing the button together, God forbid if it comes to that, but we'll be the ones choosing the targets. He agreed.
It's awkward to speak too loudly about nuclear matters like nuclear tests or the presence of nuclear weapons or plans for a nuclear response in case of aggression against the Russian Federation. But you can speak loudly about Oreshnik because after all, that's not a nuclear threat.
So will Oreshnik appear in Belarus by the end of the year or any day now?
We haven't set a specific time frame. First of all, it's not urgent. Of course, I understand that Oreshnik is needed in Russia as well and so on. It's not urgent. Well, and then it's not that simple. When I said 10 complexes, well, I was kidding. Well, listen, we then left separately with Putin. He told me, listen, you said 10. I didn't promise you 10. I say, well, you just said 10. He says, well, we can't get 10 that quickly. I was just joking with the journalist. Of course, I understand 10 complexes. Are you serious? That's crazy money. We literally have Oreshnik coming any day now. We agreed with President Putin that the next installation will actually be delivered to Belarus even earlier than to Russia.
On the one hand, the first task is solved internally for propaganda purposes. Look, we're surrounded by enemies, but we have a very powerful weapon called Oreshnik. That's it. So don't be afraid and stick with me, with Lukashenko, and everything will be fine for you. And the second propaganda task is aimed at the external audience, which the Belarusians are now carrying out, essentially trying to scare Western countries.
The most interesting thing is that the upcoming Zapad 2025 exercises are being presented as very safe and even peace-loving.
There are about 30 military attaches in our country, 9 of them from NATO countries. They will also have the opportunity. We are inviting all of them to observe our exercises. In this way, we once again emphasize our peacefulness and openness, and the fact that we truly want to reduce this military tension, which unfortunately we see and feel. Well, as they say, we are making the first move.
Even Lukashenko himself directly refuted all the rumors about where that very attack is supposedly being prepared from.
We have proven to all of them that we are not planning to attack you there and that we will conduct the exercises in the center, deep inside Belarus.
For what purpose?
Courses.
Here are the changes to the course plans.
So, as not to give you, as I already said, any reason to further accuse us of being aggressors, of planning to attack, at the very least, the countries of Eastern Europe, Poland, the Baltic states, and especially Ukraine.
On the contrary, I would actually interpret this particular interview and Lukashenko's significantly shifted emphasis as very real and concrete evidence that such a substantial operation is indeed being meticulously prepared by the Russians, and that in absolutely no way whatsoever have they truly stepped back or completely abandoned its full and complete implementation.
As for Oreshnik, as they say, they started off on a high note. They boasted that it was the most innovative and deadly weapon. They threatened to wipe out the entire West with it, but everyone can see how it ended, with isolated public statements and zero real results.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
The Russian Federation has broken through the Ukrainian armed forces' defensive line. Donbass is hanging by a thread. Fierce battles have erupted right at this very moment. Ukrainian defenders say that hell really does exist, and right now it's there in the Sumy region like a meat grinder. The enemy is fleeing with all their might. Our forces have launched a counterattack. Why are the Russians gritting their teeth but not retreating, even on the hottest sections of the front? Details in the following report.
The Russians made a sudden breakthrough on the front before the meeting between Putin and Trump. This was reported by the Wall Street Journal. The occupiers found a gap in the Ukrainian defenses and then used their massive reserves of manpower to break through. This refers to the advance in the direction of Dobropilya in the Donetsk region.
Now, of course, Russian troops will try to capitalize on this moment. They will try to consolidate, send additional reinforcements there, more forces, and possibly even equipment. And now, even in the next few days, the armed forces of Ukraine have a chance to somehow contain this breakthrough, to cut off, for example, these breakthrough units, to liberate territory at the very base of this breakthrough, or to start attacking from different directions and take, let's say, all the villages and settlements along the way so that there is nowhere for them to hide and so on.
At the same time, military analysts report that the Russian Federation does not control all the territory that the assault troops managed to pass through. Most likely during the breakthrough they were moving in light vehicles, and at the moment it cannot be said that the enemy has managed to consolidate and take control of the entire salient.
For now, there are only sabotage and reconnaissance groups there. These are irregular troops.
The Ukrainian command has already responded to the Russian breakthrough. It is reported that the most combat-ready National Guard units from the OZU battalion, who have already more than once experienced those same small assault groups, have been redeployed to this direction as reinforcements.
Also, it is important to note that this is a significant point.
Commenting on the situation, the spokesperson for the Dnipro military group confirmed the Russians' local success, but noted that it involved about a dozen soldiers who managed to slip through the line of contact and are now hiding in the trenches wherever they managed to get.
At the same time, it is crucial to acknowledge that multiple events or circumstances are unfolding concurrently, creating a complex interplay of factors that demand our attention and consideration. This simultaneity means that various aspects are happening in parallel, requiring a comprehensive understanding of their interconnectedness and immediate impact on the situation at hand.
Experts note that Pokrovsk itself, the city that all these efforts were aimed at encircling and which is located slightly south of the breakthrough site, continues to hold quite confidently despite constant heavy assaults.
In other words, the Russian troops had been advancing actively up to this point, but in Rodinske they've really hit a serious obstacle, and for a couple of weeks now there have been heavy battles there. They can't make any progress. So, basically, the defense of this sort of semicircular salient is holding quite confidently, I'll put it cautiously. As I've already mentioned, there are a lot of Russian forces there, they're constantly attacking, but even so, we're not seeing any kind of collapse there.
The situation is also tense to the north of Pokrovsk. There, the Russians have once again become more active in the Lyman direction. However, after several days of intensified attacks, apart from dozens of dead assault troops, Russia has gained nothing here.
Will our forces have the necessary reserves? I don't really know. Basically, we do indeed have powerful forces that can effectively hold back the enemy's advance and prevent them from moving forward.
Monitoring channels are also reporting Russian activity in Crimea. Equipment is currently being transferred there from the Moscow and Leningrad military districts, with the possibility of it being further sent to the Zaporizhzhia direction or towards Pokrovsk. However, in recent months for Russia, using armored vehicles in assaults has become a luxury, so the entire operation could simply be a deception.
At the moment, yes, the Russian forces have not set any particularly difficult tasks for the Ukrainian armed forces, specifically on the Zaporizhzhia front, in the Zaporizhzhia region. That is, yes, there have been local attacks there, and maybe they will try to create some more serious tension, including to force reserves to be redeployed from the Pokrovsk direction, simply so there aren't enough forces everywhere.
Announcer, but on the Sumy direction, it is the Russians who are lacking forces. Yes, according to President Volodymyr Zelensky, in the Sumy region, the armed forces of Ukraine managed to retake a third of all the captured settlements, which is 6 out of 18. In 2 locations, according to Zelensky, the defense forces even reached the border with Russia.
Roman Busk. They can't even properly hold on to these territories. It's not the first village. Some have been cleared, some have been liberated, 2 settlements have been freed, and now fighting is still ongoing for Alexeyevka. So, Ukrainian forces are gradually, of course within their means, it's clear they don't have a large number of reserves, but nevertheless they are reducing this bridgehead. It's not expanding, on the contrary, it's gradually shrinking. All of this is because, for example, during the invasion of the Sumy region, Russian troops are not using heavy equipment, making it much harder for them to defend.
Announcer, the defense forces are also holding their positions in the Zaporizhzhia region and have advanced 1 kilometer deep into enemy positions in Luhansk region. Anna Timofeeva.
Chasiv Yar is being choked by strikes from FPV drones. The occupiers seem to go berserk, launching assaults, but didn't even make it halfway. Our artillery struck and wiped out the Russian horde. They scattered into tiny pieces and in panic tried to save those whom our shells had missed. The enemy clung to Kostiantynivka, however, and received a powerful beating there. Cannonade of misfortunes of the Russian army. Which of our defenders is behind this? Don't miss out.
Correspondent. It was probably a living force, yes it was. Military? Yeah. Correspondent. The smoke barely has time to clear before another FPV flies in. Since morning, in the area of Chasiv Yar, our defenders have been eliminating occupiers who tried to hide in the thickets.
Military. 2 men at a time are moving in our direction. Well, now an FPV has just hit them. Correspondent.
And as for the apartment buildings, the artillerymen have already worked them over. Since morning, increased enemy activity was also noticed there.
Military. Yeah, something was running around there. 3 or 4 men. They've been there for 2 days already, hanging around. We hit them a bit.
Correspondent. The front has been rumbling since early morning. With the first rays of sunlight, the Russians strike with glide bombs and artillery. But our gunners from the 24th King Danilo Brigade are not staying silent either.
Correspondent.
For a while, the front falls silent, but this quiet is deceptive, because instead of artillery shells or rockets, drones are flying in the sky. Artilleryman.
Here, the panoramic site was completely destroyed. Right here, you can see the drone dropped munitions welded on. There, a shaped charge jet pierced straight into the ammo compartment. Artilleryman, right into the ammo compartment. Correspondent, right here, yes? Artilleryman, yes, yes.
Correspondent. Artillerymen have always been a prime target for the enemy, and with the advent of drones, they're hunted almost around the clock. Artilleryman.
There's fear, but we're kind of getting used to it, and a lot helps. Guys go ahead, guide us. Electronic warfare units, of course, get involved. That's it. Well, basically, I guess I've gotten used to it by now. Adrenaline.
Correspondent. And here, in fact, are the footage of the work of the artillerymen of the 24th Brigade. Together with drone pilots, they recently stopped another Russian assault on Chasiv Yar. Pilot.
This team won the battle and everything. 8 shells were fired. I set the cover and that's it. Without a spotter, 8 shells landed in one spot.
Correspondent. At that time, the occupiers in armored vehicles tried to bring in manpower. Among the soldiers were women, but not all of them made it to the assault. 2 occupiers were killed, 11 more were wounded, and the equipment burned. Artilleryman.
Well, now they've started storming a bit more than, say, a couple of months ago. Now, more massive and sustained assaults have truly begun, and already with the significant involvement of some of their armored vehicles and heavy equipment, they probably want to capture the entirety of Chasiv Yar completely and as swiftly as possible, aiming to secure this strategic location. Although they claim they've already captured it, well, that's not true.
Correspondent. Chasiv Yar is in complete ruins, but for the Russians it is extremely important. Nearby is the long-suffering Kostiantynivka, which the enemy is also tearing down brick by brick. Over a year of fighting for the city, the defenders here have taken out more than 1,000 occupiers and destroyed their equipment. Although the artillerymen themselves speak rather modestly about their contribution to the defense. Artilleryman.
Well, our primary job is mostly to effectively stop stationary enemy equipment and significant concentrations of enemy personnel, and our FPV drones truly help us immensely with this crucial task, as they are the ones precisely stopping all these aggressive assaults, the formidable enemy vehicles, and the relentless advance of enemy forces.
Correspondent. While we are filming, the artillerymen are checking their equipment. The order to fire can come at any moment, so everything must be ready. Artilleryman.
The sun rises from over there and it shines very brightly. It can burn. Artilleryman, so the number of shots is about...
Correspondent. Successfully camouflaging and digging in deeper. These are the realities even for artillerymen. And for deep trenches, you need equipment. So, using the details on the screen, you can join the fundraiser and donate for special equipment for the soldiers of the 24th Brigade. It will save more than one life. Ole Kornienko, Fakti ICTV, United News, Anna Timofeyeva.
We took apart Russian Shaheds for parts. The components that make up these deadly drones are astonishing, shocking even. America and Switzerland have played a dirty trick. Parts from these countries are increasingly being found in Russian drones. A real betrayal. China is not the biggest evil. Don't miss what's next.
These are exclusive shots of the wreckage of enemy drones. We are with you in one of the facilities where examinations of downed missiles and drones are conducted. Not every film crew can get in here. We're surrounded by a whole warehouse of drones. A specialist is showing us the trophies they're working with. For safety reasons, we are not showing the expert's face.
Here we have two primary and distinct types of Shaheds, specifically the Geran 2 models, which are currently and extensively being utilized in ongoing operations.
These are them, right?
Yes, there are several here. the KC series and the I series.
Here are the Iranian kamikaze drones that Tehran supplied to the enemy at the start of the full-scale invasion. And this interesting exhibit is the Herbera drone. It doesn't have any combat payload, and essentially it imitates a real drone as a decoy maneuver.
They're very cheap. The construction is simple, no fiberglass or composite materials, just ordinary foam. It's very light, and its task is simply to fly nearby alongside when a swarm of Shaheds is coming to be close and create the impression of a mass attack.
And this is the Geran 2. It's quite large, 3 by 3 meters. The expert shows which parts it consists of.
This body is made of lightweight composite materials. It's quite light. In any aircraft, it's very important how much fuel you can load, how big of a warhead you can install. The heavier, the better. Here we can see the fuel tanks. The fuel system usually has 2 electric pumps with filters. This is the engine, and
this engine, it
is one of which, in particular, the following
manufacturer from which
country? Well, as I said on the website, the Made in China platform, these companies, Chinese, yes, the engines. This here is the onboard computer, a very important system, the onboard computer. This unit is actually called B101. It comes already assembled. Avionics panel, this is simply, the launch, the start in such a...
And that's not all. We are taken to a laboratory where specialists have recreated the internal components of the Russian Geran 2 on a test stand.
Here it starts with the generator part. Servo motors, servo drives, the Comet system, battery pack, GNSS system, and there's even some kind of alarm that was installed on the Shahed. It's very rare to come across, but we managed to get such an avionics panel. The most important, the key element is the onboard computer. There's even a starter, see? And it's all connected and everything works. Now our specialists will show how it works.
Of all the parts from Russian Shaheds that we've seen, most of the components are of foreign manufacture, the expert says. But recently, the share of components from China has increased significantly.
A very large portion comes from the United States, because they're basically leading in microchip manufacturing. There are also well-known ones, like the Netherlands, Switzerland, Taiwan, South Korea. And there is such a trend, for example, at the beginning. At first there were very few purely Chinese components, but now, already at this point, we can see that the number is increasing, and the replacement with components from the People's Republic of China is in full swing.
It is precisely the Celestial Empire that is the #1 country for supplying components for Russian UAVs, experts say.
90% of the components we see in Russian weapons enter Russia through China. That is, China acts as a transit hub. And there are different models here. Sometimes they are manufactured in the United States, purchased in the US by a Chinese company, and then the Chinese company resells them to Russian entities. And sometimes, for example, an American factory is located in the People's Republic of China. So from this factory, from this subsidiary company in China, this component goes to some Chinese intermediary, and then from the Chinese intermediary it ends up in Russia. And this is the most complex challenge.
Not just Chinese ones. Recently, Indian components were also found in Russian drones. This was reported by the president's office. Experts are showing what they are.
We came across some very interesting labeling. Here it says, look, India is written. So this is just a regular voltage rectifier from the generator to the systems.
Both companies, upon learning that such sensitive and critical information had originated from Ukraine, issued statements asserting that it is not always feasible or even possible for companies to meticulously track the ultimate end user of their products. This assertion was made despite the fact that some of the technologies they produce are inherently dual use, meaning they have both civilian and military applications. Consequently, given the nature of these technologies, these companies are generally expected to possess a comprehensive understanding of where their products ultimately end up, and are obligated to implement and enforce appropriate and stringent bans on the re-export of these specific products to unauthorized entities or regions, thereby preventing their misuse or diversion.
How does Russia manage to circumvent sanctions and obtain foreign components for weapons production? After all, any supplies to the aggressor country from American and European manufacturers are prohibited. Experts explain the problem lies in shadow schemes involving intermediary companies. And here, once again, China comes into play.
I'll be honest, in over a year, we haven't seen a single instance where these components were delivered directly to Russia. And for the most part, 90% of these components, which are produced by countries in the sanctions coalition, end up in Russia from the People's Republic of China. In other words, China is essentially acting as a transit hub for supplying components to the military-industrial complex of the Russian Federation.
Countries like Kazakhstan have become more active, as well as, to some extent, Azerbaijan. Until recently, Uzbekistan, Armenia, and the United Arab Emirates, which have been and continue to be a significant hub for grey schemes of supplying electronic components to the aggressor's arms industry. So these countries act as intermediaries using bypass routes to supply goods to Russia.
Experts emphasize that intermediary firms supplying components are constantly being sanctioned. But this is not enough. It is necessary for the restrictions to target the manufacturers themselves. But this is much more difficult to do. Olena Lohinova, Serhiy Kilimnik. Details from the Intermarathon TV channel, United News.
That's all from me for now. I was with you, Darina Hutsakalo. Even more intense news from the front in our next broadcast. And in the meantime, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. See you soon.